Welcome back, you beautiful people. In this episode, I want to show you guys this technique. And this technique I learned after years and years of doing programming, writing functions, and then, when I'm trying to add new arguments, the functions break. And so this is hopefully going to help you guys out to keep your code maintainable. And you can do this on JavaScript or PHP or any other language that has functions. So it's more of a technique that you should consider at some point in time. It might make your life easier in the long run when you have to, edit code that you've been building for years and years or even months upon months, right? Because you don't want to do much more edits than you should. And I'll get into the technique and I'll explain it, and hopefully you'll get to see how powerful it is as we go along in the process. So let's turn over to the code. And here what we have is a function that I created in JavaScript called sum. And sum, the function sum, uses these arguments. So we have set these required arguments that are needed to be submitted in order to get the sum. Okay, and it could be, these are random things I just used. It. Don't think of it as any particular logic. All that we're doing is we're just going to calculate sum. So that's what we're doing here. We get this, we create a sum variable, and then we add up all these arguments here, and then we return sum. And when we do that without unknown, because this is the example I want to show you, this should work totally fine. Okay, so as you can see, we're going to console.log whatever the sum is of these values here, and that should work. So we got 1571. Okay, so we have the sum. Now, of course, sometimes what we want to do is we want to adjust a function. We want to add in an argument, right? So all we do is we have an argument, a new argument. We put, new. Let's call it just new, okay? And in order to, of course, we need to sum the new argument now. So we add new, right? So let's, it should be, let's name it new value, right? New underscore value. Yeah, it doesn't really, just so we understand. So I'm saving that. I'm going to run back sum again and see what happens. Okay, so we got none, not a number, right? Now the reason why we likely got the not a number, none, is because there's a missing argument here. So wherever sum is being called, it requires all of these arguments, unless you set them as null or a default value of some sort. It's going to return that none value if it does not have all of the arguments that are available here. All right. And I want to show you this example because obviously this is a very simple example. This simple example, we are only calling the sum function once, right? We just console login one time. But let's say you have a full program. And so I'm going to add in these functions, operation 1, operation 2, operation 3. And these also call this sum function. All of these are going to fail. Okay, so let me show you what I mean. You're going to get the none value. If I run this, operation 1 is none, operation 2 is none, operation 3 is none. All because we added a new argument within the function, right? So what can we do about this? Well, how can we optimize this so that we don't always have to refer back to the arguments here being, these things are going to change. In this case, it did change because we added new value. And now everything, all of this is broken because we did that one little change that we did. Well, instead of using an argument or multiple arguments within here, why don't we use something like an object, for example, or in PHP, an associative array? That might help things. So what we could do, for example, is we could change all of this to args. Right? And then we could, instead of doing doing this where we manually add this, we could dynamically change this. But let's start one thing. Let's start with one thing, which is let's change it to args, as I said. And now let's say we create an object and we call this one example args, right? Just to make it easy. And this is an object. Okay, you can use perhaps an array, but in this case I'm using objects for a reason. And let's say here we do height, And in this case, we look at the values here, 800, blah, blah, blah. So we create that 800, we do width, 600, we do X, which is, I said 10, we do Y, which is 20, we do A, which is 1, we do B, which is 2, we do H, which is 38, and we do velocity, which is 100. Okay, so now we have an object that we can pass into this sums, but this is going to break. All right, so here's what we could do. All right, we could make this more dynamic. We could say sum is 0. We set sum to be equal to 0, and then we go through the keys of this args, right? Because we'll push this in, but we have to go through the keys of this args. This ex args will become args when we use it in the actual function itself, when we call the actual function. So we change our code. Let's go for let's get the keys first, which is object dot keys of args. Okay, and now we can go through each key. So let's say var I equals 0, key I is less than keys dot length I plus plus, and here now we get the value. Okay, so we get var value is equal to args. Well, let's get the key, right? We have to actually get the actual key. So the actual key will be keys I, right? And then we get var value, or val, which is equal to args, the key, that will give us the value. And now that we have the value, right? So the key, all these keys we got was actually here, right? These are the keys on the left-hand side, and then these are the values on the right-hand side. So what we got was, when we said object.keys, we got the keys height, width, X, Y, A, B. All of that was returned as an array, and this is the keys array. And then what we did was we went through each one of the keys. So we checked the keys.length, we went through with I, the index is I. Then we got what each key name is, right? So we got the key name here, which is height in this case, on I equals 0. And then we got the actual value, which is args key, right? So args, whatever the key name is, would give us the value, and that's what we have. And now we do the sum, which is we take sum plus equal val. And now what we should have is it will return sum after it does all of that. And that's fine. But now we have to change, of course, how this function works. So we already have this example args, and all we have to do now is we put in ex args here. Ex args here. Okay. Now I'm just going to stop running this for a while, so I'm going to uncomment it out. What did I do? Comment it out. That's it, right? And now this should work. It should return the value again, 1571. Okay. Now all of these operations, we have to adjust these operations one time, and let's say we do the same thing. So instead we do ex args. You'll get the point in a minute. It's just taking a little long. Ex args. Okay, and we do this for all of them. We got operation 1, 2, 3. Those succeeded, which we expect. Okay, so here's the thing. Now we want to add that new value, right? Now let's add that new value. So let's say in ex args, we want to add the new value. We just put in new value. And then just say 1,000, just so we see the difference. Or let's put 10,000, right? So we added in the new value. And now, as you can see, we don't actually have to edit any of our operations anymore, because the logic takes care of it. The logic is going to call, call the algorithm. The sum algorithm is going to go through each one automatically, figure it out, sum it up, and Now, if we run this, I made an error somewhere here. Okay, yeah. Now, if we run this, it works, right? And we could do the same thing. So let's say we had AB. Let's go for C 10, D 20, E 30. Okay. Again, now all of these functions that we're using it, you don't have to do anything, right? Isn't that great that you don't have to edit now the functions, the function arguments anymore in multiple spots? Remember, let's say this is 10,000 lines of code. You wouldn't have to go through changing that all the time. So it's best to really, in some circumstances, I know that's isn't always reasonable for all, but in some circumstances like this, to use something like an object or instead an array, instead of using multiple arguments in here. And that means that the code becomes more maintainable, dynamic, and then, you just have an easier time working with it. Now, there is another scenario. Okay, so there's another scenario, which is this. Let's say that we wanted to add like a label. Let's say we wanted to do some different sort of, I don't know, output that requires you to add additional arguments, but you don't want these arguments to be summed parts, right? This will obviously not work. So for example, let's say that we wanted to name this label for some reason. Let's say we wanted to add some text to this object, right? This would not work because what we should get is likely none, or we get test. Okay, so it actually added test, the string, to the end of it, which is not exactly what we want, right? Because we wanted it to return an actual value. In this case, it might be an integer or something. So you change it to a string when you added this text in. Or you would have to do some altering, but you can do that altering without editing a lot of your functions. You just have to focus on your main function. And here's what we do. Here's what we could do. So this is something you could do. All right, so we could change how this works and instead add a new object and call these object numbers. And you might be wondering, well, what is that going to do? I'll show you. And now you should be able to add label test. But this will break some. But that's a good thing. It only breaks the main function. It doesn't break all the other functions. So now, instead of looking for object.keys on args, right? Remember, args is going to push in whatever is in here, ex args in all of these examples, right? What you would now want to do is you would want this to be numbers. Now, you could do it that way, or you could just do period numbers, as long as it exists. Okay, and then you would get the keys, and then you get the keys here, and then you have to make sure that you use numbers here. And this should work. And also, it would then allow you to do something like this. We output the label, right? So we wanted to output the label. We could output label. So let's say we put test. Test instead was the sum of all values are. We could use args label here. We could comma, and then we could use sum. And what that would do is the sum of all values are in the number. The sum of values are in the number. See? And in that way, we didn't break all the other functions that we would have created before, right? Isn't that kind of cool, right? So as long as it now, as I said, it doesn't always make sense to do this, but many times it does, right? And one of the challenges that comes in with using something like this, where you use an entire object, is that sometimes you may forget what the arguments should be. So what I learned to do was I usually have some comments above where I say what args is. So args should contain Or sometimes I just copy and paste, you know, so I can either explain it like that, should contain blah, 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 or you just say args is an object, right? And then you could likely copy and paste what an example object looks like, right? That's not too hard, right? Just copy and paste what that object looks like in here. And now you have a way of remembering what the object actually has in it, right? And that's how you could kind of solve this problem. And what that will also do is you'll also add documentation to each of your function anyways, which is nice as well. So I hope this helps you guys out. I know that most times you may not need this if you're running small programs, but if you're going to run thousands upon thousands of lines, it's really important to decide whether you want to do it now as opposed to having it to do it later on, where it requires a lot more time to be spent, you know, trying to reconvert code. So it's better to just make the code as dynamic as possible. With that being said, if you did like this video, please subscribe. It goes a really, really long way. And hopefully this will help someone else out as well. It's going to also help, of course, obviously the channel. I know most people don't really care too much about the channel, but it does really help me out as well in the process of reaching more people like you that love coding. And of course, it's going to help someone and maybe save them years out of their life instead of breaking code that they could have just easily not broken the code if they thought about it in terms of using these objects. With that being said, have a wonderful day, you guys, and see you guys again soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.